Hello guys and welcome back to Game of Box Office. It's finally here, the 100 subscriber special about the possible box office run of Justice League. I know that it took me very long to finish this project, but it's finally here and I hope that you will all enjoy the next, let's say, 35 minutes. Let me quickly say some words before I start. Like I said in the prediction on Wonder Woman, I am not going to talk about how the movie will turn out quality-wise in my opinion. I'm just going to talk about 3 different scenarios and how much money the movie can probably gross in each one of them. I don't feel hate towards the DC franchise, nor do I feel hate towards the Marvel franchise. I like or love both of them and I really don't want to see any bashing in the comments between the two fan bases. If you want to trash talk Justice League down, please keep it to yourself. When you want to trash talk Marvel down, please keep it to yourself. For those of you who want to skip to a specific section of this video and don't want to see the whole thing, I'm going to fade in now all different sections of this video and where they start exactly. So, if you like, you can jump to the section you're most looking forward to. I also put them in the description box down below, so you can jump to a different section while watching the video. I'm going to start with a look back on the Dark Knight trilogy and how DC movies had a kind of different status back in the days when The Dark Knight Rises was released. After that, I'm going to give a pessimistic, realistic and optimistic prediction on Batman v Superman and Justice League if both movies would have been directed by Christopher Nolan. I'm going to continue with a post-mortem look back on Batman v Superman and with that my opinion on if the box office potential of Zack Snyder has come to an end. Afterwards, I'm going to make a comment on how important the performance of Suicide Squad was and how much it could have grossed under optimistic circumstances. Adding to this, I will continue to talk about Wonder Woman and how important the movie is for Justice League. I will also give you an update prediction on what I think the movie can gross. After that, finally, I will present you my 3 predictions, a pessimistic, a realistic and an optimistic prediction on the box office performance of Justice League. Alright, enough with the intro talk, let's get to it. So let's turn the clocks a little bit back, 11 years to be on point, when Christopher Nolan released Batman Begins back in 2005. The Batman film series was dead after very bad installments which ruined the franchise box office wise. Batman Forever in 1995 and Batman and Robin in 1997 did really no good to Batman's box office power, and it was Christopher Nolan's quest to bring the franchise back to life. Of course, as we all know, he succeeded in this task. Batman Begins grossed a little over $205 million at the domestic box office in its original run, and with more than $374 million worldwide on a $150 million production budget, Warner Bros. Was confident enough to order a sequel under Nolan's control. This sequel and the following sequel, The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, set new standards in the comic book genre and received critical acclaim from all over the planet. Box office wise, they sent the Batman franchise into box office heaven. Both movies grossed over $1 billion worldwide, and today, 8 years after The Dark Knight and 4 years after The Dark Knight Rises, the only other comic book movies which grossed more than those 2 Batman installments are The Avengers, Age of Ultron, Iron Man 3 and Civil War, and they all did it with 3D and much bigger markets. The only Marvel movie to really defeat these 2 Batman installments is probably the first Avengers from 2012, since it came out just a few months before The Dark Knight Rises and outgrossed it by almost $450 million worldwide. With that being said, I think it should be obvious what of an immense box office power the DC universe had when Christopher Nolan was still in charge back in 2012. For this first prediction what Justice League and also Batman v Superman would have grossed with Christopher Nolan in the director's chair, I want to point out one really important thing. I think that it was not Warner Bros.' decision to put Zack Snyder in charge instead of Christopher Nolan. I'm pretty sure that they wanted Nolan really bad for the director's chair for both movies, but it was Nolan's decision to not take the job on creating the DC universe with Batman v Superman and the Justice League. So it's absolutely not Warner Bros.' fault that Zack Snyder took over the job. Alright, so let's get into the prediction what Batman v Superman would have grossed under Nolan's control. Under Nolan's control, Batman v Superman would have probably premiered sometimes in 2015 and not in 2016. I mentioned multiple times in the past, for example in the Into Darkness analysis, that a time span of 4 years between a movie and its sequel is always not good for the box office performance. This time span actually took place when Snyder directed Batman v Superman, since it was seen by most people as a sequel to The Dark Knight Rises and not as a sequel to Man of Steel. I know a lot of you will probably say that this is not true, but I asked over 100 people for this video what they think, and 86 of them said that they watched Batman v Superman as a sequel to The Dark Knight Rises, while 29 people said that they watched the movie as a sequel to Man of Steel. So, with the increased international markets, with comic book movies being way more loved all over the planet, and the fact that the box office performance of The Dark Knight Rises was even held back by the 4 years time span between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises and the shooting which took place during the first weekend of the movie, I think the pessimistic prediction of Nolan's Batman v Superman would put the film a little bit under Civil War. In this scenario, when Batman v Superman would have an equal quality to, let's say, Insomnia, the movie would have opened with $180 million in the domestic market, and after a multiplier of 2.6 would have settled for a domestic total of $468 million. In the comic book movie genre, just third behind The Dark Knight and The Avengers. On the overseas front, Batman v Superman would have outgrossed the performance of The Dark Knight Rises by a small margin, with about $660 million in total. This would put Batman v Superman at a worldwide total of $1.128 billion. In the genre, this would have been fifth, behind The Avengers, Age of Ultron, Iron Man 3 and Civil War. But keep in mind, this would have taken place without 3D and in the pessimistic scenario. Iron Man 3 and Civil War grossed as much as they grossed because the most optimistic scenario took place. In the realistic scenario, let's say Batman v Superman would have equaled the quality of The Dark Knight Rises and the movie would have connected very good with the Chinese audience, I would predict the movie to land somewhere between Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron. Batman v Superman would have grossed $190 million on its opening weekend, and after a multiplier of 2.7 would have finished with $513 million in the domestic market. Still third behind The Dark Knight and The Avengers, but very close now to beat The Dark Knight and also very close behind Age of Ultron, with the third biggest comic book movie opening of all time. Due to a better performance in China and slightly increased grosses in the rest of the world, Batman v Superman would have grossed $770 million in overseas territories, for a worldwide total of $1.283 billion. This gross would put Batman v Superman on third position, behind Age of Ultron and ahead of Iron Man 3 at the worldwide box office. Now to the optimistic scenario. When Batman v Superman would have equaled the quality of The Dark Knight, and the marketing towards the movie would have been perfect, I can see the movie to outgross Age of Ultron, but still take the second spot behind The Avengers. Batman v Superman would have opened with $195 million, just shy of $200 million, and after a multiplier of 2.9 would have finished with a final domestic gross of $565.5 million. This would outgross The Dark Knight, and Batman v Superman would take second place just behind The Avengers on the domestic front. In overseas territories, Batman v Superman would have grossed $890 million, taking the third place behind Age of Ultron, and The Avengers just barely, and finishing up with a worldwide total of $1.455.5 billion. With this gross, Batman v Superman would have placed second all time behind The Avengers and ahead of Age of Ultron. To sum it up, pessimistic prediction $1.128 billion worldwide, realistic prediction $1.283 billion worldwide, optimistic prediction $1.455.5 billion worldwide. These numbers are coming together because of the better time span between The Dark Knight Rises and Batman v Superman, Christopher Nolan as a director, and the with that very possible better quality of the movie. Please keep in mind that The Avengers from 2012 was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most moviegoers, since something like that never happened before. A team-up of multiple superheroes, and they were the first to do it. This explains why even in the optimistic prediction Batman v Superman would have settled for second behind The Avengers. Also, On the overseas front, even in the optimistic scenario, Batman v Superman would have settled for third behind both Avengers movies. This is due to the fact that Marvel really did an incredible job to make the Marvel brand well known and loved all over the planet. That is the reason why Marvel movies perform just better at the international box office. Maybe a few of you guys will say that Batman v Superman would have had more competition in 2015 summer compared to March-April in 2016. But to be quite honest, I don't think any competition would have affected the movie by much. A movie where Batman and Superman fight each other, directed by Christopher Nolan, would have been such a huge event. Maybe Jurassic World would have hurt the performance of Batman v Superman a bit, but not by much. With all of that being said, let's think about what a Justice League movie would have grossed under Nolan's control. Every scenario, the pessimistic, realistic and optimistic one for Justice League, builds on the predictions I just made for Batman v Superman under Nolan's control. So, Justice League after a Batman v Superman which would have grossed a bit over $1.1 billion would actually gross a bit less than Batman v Superman. In this scenario, Justice League would open with $180 million but fall a bit faster with a multiplier of 2.4 and a final domestic total of $432 million. On the overseas front, Batman v Superman would catch up a little bit to Batman v Superman with $680 million in total, but finally this would put the movie's worldwide total at $1.112 billion, slightly under the $1.128 billion of Batman v Superman in the same scenario. Of course, this would still be a great success and lots of money in Warner Bros. Pocket, but the movie can do better. In the realistic scenario, it's actually the other way around. Justice League would outgross Batman v Superman slightly in this prediction. Justice League would open with $195 million and after a multiplier of 2.75, would finish its domestic run with $536.25 million. On the overseas front, Justice League would top the $770 million from Batman v Superman with $790 million, for a combined worldwide total of $1.326.25 billion. Now of course the big question. With the huge hype of a phenomenal Batman v Superman behind its back, could Justice League, directed by Christopher Nolan, outgross the Avengers from 2012 when everything would have fallen into perfect place? The answer, at least from my perspective, is no. In this scenario, Justice League would have opened to $200 million and after a multiplier of 2.9 would have finished with a domestic total of $580 million, topping everything out of the comic book movie genre easily and taking second place just behind the Avengers. On the overseas front, Justice League would outgross the Avengers and collect a total of $920 million, just second place behind Age of Ultron's overseas total of $946.4 million. Combined, this would put Justice League at $1.5 billion, just $18 million shy of the Avengers. This is it, guys. I will now fade in all grosses I just predicted for Batman v Superman and Justice League under Nolan's control. Keep in mind, this is just a prediction and of course, it could have happened very differently. In my opinion, this is just the most realistic approach when you think about a scenario like this. So what does that tell us? The DC brand can perform on the same level box office wise like the Marvel brand is doing. Because of that, even under Zack Snyder's hand, the scenario of a $1 billion plus Justice League movie is far from being gone in my opinion. While I don't see Justice League to break records after what happened with Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad, I still think that it can pull off great numbers. With that, let's continue with a post-mortem analysis on Batman v Superman under Zack Snyder's control. When I released my Batman v Superman prediction in early February this year, and my pessimistic prediction put the superhero clash at $925 million worldwide with just $375 million in the domestic market, most people said that I was horribly wrong. It's funny that even this prediction was overestimating the movie's performance. Let's make a few things very clear out of the gate. Batman v Superman hit the most pessimistic scenario it was able to hit. There couldn't have been a more worse outcome than what really happened. $330 million in the domestic market and $542 million in overseas territories are far below the amount of money that Warner Bros. Wanted Batman v Superman to gross. To top that off, Batman v Superman did not manage to get to a 2.0 multiplier, which is actually close to impossible to not hit. In the Watchmen analysis, I said that I think that Zack Snyder is the only director to create a movie with a budget of over $100 million, which did not manage to gross its opening weekend gross at least another time over its entire run. Well, Snyder is now officially the guy who achieved this horrible thing actually twice. Batman v Superman opened to $166 million and grossed $330.4 million in total. This puts the multiplier at 1.99. Even with superhero movies which open so insanely big on the first weekend, a high multiplier is still the most important thing to achieve. To get a multiplier of under 2 with a movie which sits on a budget of $250 million is comparable to receive the grade F in school. Another indicator for this incredible bad performance over the long run is the time the movie spent in cinemas. After only 84 days, a 12-week total, Batman v Superman was vanished out of the cinemas completely. I actually cannot think of any big movie with a run which is shorter than that. Normally, even when the movie is heavily front-loaded, the 100 days mark will be broken at least. For comparison, Civil War spent 140 days in cinemas, The Dark Knight Rises spent 147 days in cinemas, and Age of Ultron spent 161 days in cinemas. Man of Steel, the last directing job from Zack Snyder before Batman v Superman, actually also managed to not get to the 100 days mark, but 98 days are still way better than 84. To talk about the budget for a second. With around $250 million spent on production, Batman v Superman is one of the most expensive comic book movies of all time, on one level with Civil War on the second spot, just behind Age of Ultron, which sits on roughly $275 million. Additionally to that, Warner Bros. And DC spent an estimated $165 million on marketing for the movie, which puts Batman v Superman on total cost of $415 million. So, to break even, the movie had to gross $830 million. With a worldwide total of $873 million, Batman v Superman just barely crawled over this mark, making Batman v Superman not successful at all. To sum this all up, Batman v Superman was a disappointment at the worldwide box office. This is a fact, my friends. And it was a big disappointment. The multiplier is horrible, check. The 84 days the movie spent in cinemas are horrible, check. The profit that Warner Bros. Earned through home entertainment sales are far from what they expected to earn, and whatever Warner Bros. Is saying or said in the past, the results of this movie brought up huge and complex discussions in the production house of Warner Bros. For 100%. Check. Do I think that Zack Snyder is a bad director? No, I actually don't think so. Zack Snyder made clear with movies like 300, Watchmen and Dawn of the Dead that he can create very good movies, and to be quite fair, there were also far worse Superman installments than Man of Steel. I can understand that all of what I said right now kind of gives the feeling that I hate Zack Snyder, but this is far from being correct. I just think that he kind of lost his box office grip, and his style got old over the years. Now to the most interesting fact. Does this mean that Batman v Superman showed Warner Bros. That the DC brand is not strong at the box office? In my opinion, it's actually the other way around. With horrible reviews, horrible word of mouth, and probably the most disappointing performance of the whole year, Batman v Superman still managed to gross close to $900 million. Civil War grossed $1.15 billion worldwide in the most optimistic prediction that was able to take place. I actually overpredicted Civil War's performance in the optimistic prediction by $190 million. When you now count this performance backwards to what Civil War maybe have grossed in the most pessimistic scenario, I would put Civil War at $930 million worldwide. $330 million in the domestic market and $600 million overseas. With that being said, I think it's obvious that the box office power of the DC brand and the Marvel brand is actually far away from being divided by a huge margin. It's actually pretty close. When we now talk about the still ongoing performance of Suicide Squad, I think it gets even more obvious that the DC movies are far from being box office poison. Suicide Squad managed to gross just a bit under $750 million worldwide, by receiving even worse reviews and worse word of mouth in comparison to its DC Universe prequel Batman v Superman. To be quite fair, the marketing towards Suicide Squad was one of the best marketing campaigns from the past few years. Every trailer was cut perfectly, the TV spots were great, and overall the whole package of the project seemed very, very good. But still, after a horrible Batman v Superman performance and then another disappointment, Suicide Squad managed to pull off quite good numbers. Many people were predicting that the DC Universe brand will lose lots of viewers after Batman v Superman, but it did not become reality. The $325 million domestic total of Suicide Squad is actually just $5 million under what Batman v Superman grossed in the domestic market. And while Suicide Squad is far away from being a small movie, it's still much smaller than the two most well-known superheroes of all time fighting each other in one movie. On top of that, Suicide Squad earned $420 million from overseas territories, what is also quite an achievement. You have to keep in mind right here that Suicide Squad did not get a China release, but Batman v Superman did. When you add the $95 million that Batman v Superman grossed in China on the worldwide gross of Suicide Squad, you actually get a worldwide total of $840 million for the movie, just $33 million shy of Batman v Superman's worldwide total. Now I'm going to talk about what Suicide Squad could have grossed in a normal scenario and an optimistic scenario. When David Ayer would have created a movie more close to the quality of his last movie, Fury, Suicide Squad would have grossed much more money. In this scenario, Suicide Squad would have opened to $135 million, just slightly more than what the movie actually grossed, and after a multiplier of 2.6 would have finished with a domestic total of $358.8 million, outgrossing Batman v Superman in the domestic market by roughly $28 million. In overseas countries, due to much better performances all over the planet, Suicide Squad would have collected $510 million for a combined worldwide total of $868.8 million. Remember, all of that without a China release. In the optimistic scenario, Suicide Squad would have cracked $900 million worldwide. The domestic opening weekend would have landed somewhere around $150 million, and after a multiplier of 2.5, Suicide Squad would have finished with $375 million in total. Additional to that, Suicide Squad would have collected $550 million in countries outside of the domestic market, for a combined worldwide total of $925 million. Keep in mind, without a single dollar from China. Let's turn the clocks back a bit again. Before Suicide Squad was released, I made a video where I presented you guys a pessimistic, realistic and optimistic prediction like I always do. I predicted that in the most optimistic outcome, Suicide Squad will make $761 to $800 million worldwide. Suicide Squad performed under the absolutely most pessimistic circumstances, and it came very close, with $745 million, and it's still running in cinemas. So I also underpredicted the box office performance of Suicide Squad heavily. Now let's answer a few simple questions. 1. Would Suicide Squad outgross Doctor Strange with the same quality level? Yes, for sure it would. Would have Batman v Superman outgross Civil War when the movie would have had the same quality comparable to Civil War? A 50-50 chance. It would have been very close, but both movies would have performed on the exact same level. 3. Do the DC Cinematic Universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe have the same box office power? Yes. 100% yes. They both have pretty much the same box office power. The only reason why DC movies seem weaker is simply because the quality of Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman were far worse than the quality of Civil War and Doctor Strange. And this is the only reason why they performed not as good as their Marvel rivalry movies. Although it could happen that Doctor Strange grosses less money than Suicide Squad when the movie falls fast in the next few weeks, but that's not realistic at all. 4. Would a Batman v Superman from Christopher Nolan and a Suicide Squad from David Ayer after that outperform Civil War and Doctor Strange in direct comparison? Most probably yes. I give Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad a 95% winning chance in this scenario. 5. Do I think that the audiences will now go away after two movies that really not connected with a lot of people? No, this effect will not come into play for Justice League. And keep in mind, there is still Wonder Woman to be released before the Justice League takes place. With that being said, I will now continue to talk about Wonder Woman's importance on the whole topic. While it was a fun prediction to think about what Batman v Superman and the Justice League would have crossed under Nolan's control, I will now let this factor go and continue to talk just about the current situation of the DC cinematic universe. When Wonder Woman premieres and is just by fact a better movie than Suicide Squad or Batman v Superman, this movie could actually get the DC cinematic universe on a much better road again. I already created a prediction on Wonder Woman that you can watch here, where I basically said that Wonder Woman will be affected by 0% from the DC movies released before. Wonder Woman is basically the start of a new genre, the female superhero movies. Of course, there were some movies in the past with female superheroes, but either the female superheroes weren't acting in the leading role, or the movie is so far back that it's basically not relevant anymore. Wonder Woman will perform good or bad just because of the quality it will deliver. In the prediction, I put the optimistic limit of Wonder Woman's gross at $785 million worldwide, $315 million in the domestic market and another $470 million from overseas territories. Now that I rethought about all of the grosses out of the DC cinematic universe, I have to admit that the most optimistic outcome will be actually slightly higher in my opinion. Something like a 335 million total in the domestic market and a 500 million in overseas territories is way more accurate for the most optimistic prediction. This would put Wonder Woman at $835 million worldwide. When this scenario takes place, or the realistic scenario takes place instead, Justice League will be pushed because of that. So to sum it up, don't forget that there is still Wonder Woman to be released, and don't underestimate how much this movie can actually affect Justice League in a positive way. Now, finally, after all this time, let's begin with the prediction on Justice League. As always, I will start to talk about things which work in favor for a good box office performance of the movie. First of all, I want to talk about the release timing of Justice League. On the weekend when the movie premieres, there is no other movie to challenge it. To be quite fair, we are still 1 year away from the release, so there can be still movies which will be put on this date, but when there would be a big movie to open, we would know it by now. Since the first weekend is of course the most important one for the Justice League movie, this is a great sign. On the second weekend of Justice League's run, it has to face Darkest Hour. Not really a movie which can hurt Justice League. On the third weekend there is Coco to be released, a new movie from the production studios Disney and Pixar. This kind of movies always perform huge in the domestic market, and while it's probably a bit of a different demographic group which will turn up to see this movie, it can still hurt Justice League a bit. But since this is already the third weekend of Justice League's run, I think that when the movie will affect Justice League's performance, it will be not so dramatically anymore. On the fourth weekend, Justice League has to face off against the unbeatable giant Star Wars Episode 8. This is basically the moment when Justice League will get a huge hit financially, and Star Wars will basically take a huge amount of screens from Justice League. The movie will drop immensely hard, but we are already at the fourth weekend then, so Justice League can take this hit. This sounds actually pretty good all in my opinion. Sure, 2 weeks before Justice League, there's Thor Ragnarok to hit cinemas, and we already know that Thor Ragnarok will feature not only Chris Hemsworth as Thor and Mark Ruffalo as Hulk, but also, spoiler, Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, since this info has been given to us in the end credit scene of Doctor Strange. The box office potential of the third Thor movie has gone through the roof since then. With this amount of huge characters in it, we are basically facing a kind of little brother of Civil War here, box office wise. While I don't think that Thor Ragnarok will affect Justice League by much, when Thor Ragnarok is really good, let's say Doctor Strange level, $5 to $10 million can get lost from the opening weekend gross of Justice League. Now I want to talk about the budget. While it's totally unknown what the exact budget of Justice League will be, when there was still the plan to release 2 Justice League movies and produce them both in one whip, they had a planned production budget of $500 million for them. Because Warner Bros. Saw that their plans are not really working out on Batman v Superman, they scratched the plan to produce 2 Justice League movies right out of the gates and just starting now with one movie. I think a budget of around $230 million is realistic to assume. Not much less than Batman v Superman, but still huge. The marketing will land probably somewhere around $150 million. So, a combined total of $380 million will be spent on Justice League. This will put the break-even point at about $760 to $800 million worldwide. With this, Justice League will be basically on the same level when it comes to spendings with Batman v Superman, and while some people may say this is not good, I think this is actually alright. Let's put this point also on the pro list. Another point for the pro list is of course that we will see Aquaman pretty much for the first time in Justice League. And also Flash and Cyborg will be 2 good arguments for fans of the DC franchise to go and watch the Justice League, even when Wonder Woman before that is bad. Then there's also something which comes to my mind which can be either a pro point for Justice League or a negative point. 2017 is basically packed with comic book movies. We have Logan in March, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in May, Wonder Woman in June, Spider-Man Homecoming in July, followed by Thor Ragnarok in November, and Justice League at the end of the chain. This year we had also 6 movies with Civil War, Deadpool, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, X-Men Apocalypse and Doctor Strange. But the big difference is that the movies weren't that big, and Batman v Superman was not at the end of the release schedule, but more in the front. 2 scenarios could become reality. The hype towards Justice League isn't really starting to get big, and after 5 huge comic book movies, audiences will be a little bit tired of this genre and this will affect Justice League in a bad way. Or the hype really starts to get big after a good Wonder Woman. Here and there the Marvel movies kind of don't deliver the way they should do. Justice League will get a box office bump because it's the last movie in the release schedule of 2017 when it comes to comic book movies. As you see, both things could happen. Alright, I will now fade in all aspects I just counted for a good or bad box office performance of the Justice League, and I will now start with the final pessimistic prediction on the movie. When Wonder Woman is not a good movie and fails box office wise, when all Marvel movies in 2017 are very good and Thor Ragnarok is the best out of them with a Civil War 2 feel to it because of the huge cast, and when on top of that Justice League is no better than Batman v Superman, I can see Justice League to improve slightly on the worldwide gross of Batman v Superman. Because of the very good Thor Ragnarok, Justice League will open with just $165 million and after a multiplier of 2.05 will finish with $338.25 million in total in the domestic market. Due to the now better known DC brand in overseas territories, Justice League will collect a total of $600 million from overseas markets for a combined worldwide total of $938.25 million. While this is better than what happened with Batman v Superman, it's probably still not enough for Warner Bros. Who really want to challenge the Avengers movies with this DC Universe superhero team up. Luckily for them, in the realistic prediction, Justice League will get a huge bump when Wonder Woman is a very good movie and therefore kind of compensates the not so happy DC fans about the last 2 movies. Justice League will have a very good starting point right out of the gates. When on top of that Justice League is quite alright, let's say on Thor the Dark World level, the signs are even better. In this scenario, Justice League will open with $175 million and after a multiplier of 2.3 will finish its domestic run with $402.5 million. Already very close to Civil War and Age of Ultron is not so far away anymore. In overseas territories, Justice League will benefit from a better performance in China and collect a total of $695 million. This will put the movie's worldwide total just slightly under $1.1 billion with $1.097.5 billion to be on point. This performance would make the studio bosses of Warner Bros. Probably very happy, and the DC brand would be on a very good way finally, when everything falls into perfect place. And I really mean everything. Justice League could come close to 1.3 billion worldwide. In this scenario, Justice League would open with $183 million and after a multiplier of 2.6 will finish its domestic run with $475.8 million in total, ahead of Ultron's domestic total and in the world of comic book movies just behind The Avengers from 2012 and The Dark Knight from 2008. On the overseas front, due to better performances from all markets, Justice League will earn a whopping $810 million for a combined worldwide total of $1.285.8 billion. Warner would be really happy. While Justice League will be not able to break Ultron's or even the Avengers worldwide gross or overseas gross, with nearly $1.3 billion, this would be a great sign that the big superhero team-up of DC can challenge the big Avengers movies for the comic book movie throne maybe sometime in the future. The situation for Justice League 2 would be very good and it would be exciting to see how good this franchise is going to evolve in the future. When you really watched this video all through, I want to thank you so very much. This was really hard to make and I basically worked my ass off for 2 weeks, so this becomes the best prediction I created so far on this channel. Thank you so much for 100 subscribers and I hope that I can give you another huge prediction when I hopefully hit 200 subscribers sometime in the future. Discuss in the comments what you think will be the most realistic outcome for Justice League from your point of view, and I also want to know what you guys think would have happened when Nolan would have been the man in charge behind the Justice League. Please, as I also said in the beginning of this video, be peaceful in the comments. A big love to all Marvel fans and a big love to all DC fans. In the description box below you can find all predictions and analyses which are important for this video. So when you want to watch them, just click through them on your own. Also, when you like what I do here on YouTube, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel, since it would really be helpful big time. You can also follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Links are in the description box below. I'm very happy that this huge project is finished now and I can go back to normalized release schedules. The next prediction will be a video about Blade Runner 2049 or Fast 8. See you soon guys, bye bye.